Hello. I don't usually feel ready when I turn the camera on. I doubt I ever will. There's always the sense that I should wait until I've sorted my thoughts better, until the words feel cleaner. But I've learned that waiting is one of the things that got me here, so I'll start anyway. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm 78 years old. I live alone now, in a house that still carries the habits of 4 people, even though there's only one left to make noise in it. My wife, Eleanor, died 2 years ago. We were married for 51 years. I still say that number slowly, as if it might change if I rush past it. It doesn't. When people hear a title like this, they usually expect something organized. Neat lessons, clearly labeled, things you can take with you and apply. That isn't how this works for me. What I learned didn't arrive as lessons. They arrived as moments I didn't understand until much later, sometimes decades later, when there was nothing left to do with them except remember. For most of my life, I thought I was doing things right. Not perfectly, but responsibly. I worked, I stayed loyal, I didn't cause trouble. I believed that counted for something, and it did, to a point. But there's a difference between living correctly and living honestly, and I didn't learn that until the margin for mistakes was gone. Eleanor used to say I was dependable. She meant it kindly. I took pride in it. Dependable sounded solid. It sounded like a man you could build a life with. What she didn't say, and what I didn't notice, was that dependable isn't the same as present. You can rely on someone who is never really with you. We met when we were young enough to think time was something other people ran out of. I was 26, she was 24. We talked about practical things, where we'd live, how many kids we might have, what kind of future made sense. We didn't talk much about feelings. I didn't know how. She tried. I answered in ways that closed conversations without sounding unkind. We had 2 sons, Michael and David. They grew fast, the way children do when you're busy looking elsewhere. Michael was loud, curious, always asking questions. David was quieter, watchful. I thought that meant he was easier. I see now that it meant he learned not to ask. I believed that providing for my family was the same as being there for them. I believed that if I handled the responsibilities, the rest would sort itself out. That belief carried me for decades. It also blinded me. One of the things I learned too late is that life doesn't divide itself into important moments and unimportant ones. It's all important. The small conversations, the pauses, the things you almost say and decide not to because they feel unnecessary or awkward. Those are the moments that quietly shape everything else. Eleanor would talk to me in the evenings, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. Nothing dramatic, just observations, thoughts, worries. I listened with my body and ignored her with my mind. I thought that counted as listening. I didn't understand that attention isn't passive. It requires participation. Another thing I learned is that silence doesn't keep the peace. It just delays conflict until it turns into distance. I avoided difficult conversations because I didn't want to upset anyone. What I actually did was leave everything unresolved. Unspoken things don't disappear. They settle into the space between people. I also learned that being busy is one of the most socially acceptable ways to avoid your life. No one questions it. People praise it. I hid behind it for years. Work, chores, obligations, they gave me an excuse not to sit still long enough to notice what I was missing. When Michael was young, he wanted my attention constantly. I saw that as something to manage. When David wanted less, I saw it as a relief. That was a mistake I didn't recognize until both of them were grown and our conversations became careful and polite. Eleanor noticed everything. She noticed when I was distracted. She noticed when the boys stopped asking me to play or talk. She never framed it as blame. She just commented. Quietly, I brushed those comments aside because acknowledging them would have required me to change. I learned eventually that comfort can be more dangerous than pain. Pain demands action. Comfort invites stagnation. I was comfortable for a long time, comfortable enough not to ask myself hard questions. I thought love was something you felt. I didn't realize it was something you practiced. You don't prove it with grand gestures. You prove it by showing up in ordinary moments over and over again, even when you're tired or preoccupied or unsure what to say. When Eleanor got sick, all the things I thought mattered lost their weight overnight. Work stopped being important. Schedules dissolved. What remained was the space between us, suddenly visible and impossible to ignore. I learned then that you can't make up for lost time by compressing it. You can't rush intimacy. You can't force presence. I tried, and she was kind about it. But kindness doesn't erase history. She once told me, near the end, that she always knew I loved her. I believed her. But love without expression is a lonely thing. I see that now. Another thing I learned is that regret doesn't arrive loudly. It seeps in. It shows up in quiet moments when there's no one left to distract you from it. It's patient. It waits. After Eleanor died, the house became a mirror. Every routine reminded me of something I had taken for granted. Every empty chair carried a conversation that never happened. Michael and David visit when they can. They're good men. They learned some things from me, and they learned other things in spite of me. I watch them with their children and see versions of myself that never fully formed. That's a strange feeling. Pride mixed with loss. I learned that relationships don't end when people leave. They end when curiosity disappears. I stopped being curious about the people closest to me. I assumed I knew them because I had known them for so long. I didn't realize how much they were changing while I stayed still. I also learned that understanding something doesn't mean you get to fix it. That was a hard one. For a long time, I believed that awareness was a kind of solution, that if I could just name the problem, look at it clearly enough, something would shift. But some realizations arrive without tools. They don't come with instructions. They just sit with you, heavy and unmoving, asking to be carried. I used to believe that avoiding mistakes meant I was doing well, that if I didn't make things worse, that counted as success. Now I see how much damage can be done simply by not doing anything at all. Avoidance has a way of disguising itself as patience, as caution, as responsibility. It took most of my life to see it for what it really was. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't really know you. I lived with that for years without calling it loneliness. Eleanor lived with it too. We were together every day, shared a bed, shared meals, shared a life on paper. But there were parts of me she never touched because I never put them within reach. And there were parts of her I never fully understood because I never stayed still long enough to ask. Another thing I learned too late is that people adjust to your absence. They don't always leave. They don't always fight. They simply lower their expectations. They stop asking for more. They stop offering parts of themselves that aren't being received. And one day you look around and realize you're living among people who no longer expect anything from you emotionally. When Eleanor stopped suggesting things, trips, walks, conversations late at night, I thought it meant she was content, that she had settled. I told myself that was a sign of a stable marriage. What it really meant was that she had accepted the limits of who I was willing to be. I learned that time isn't something you lose all at once. You spend it quietly on things that feel urgent in the moment but dissolve later into nothing. And the frightening part is how little you remember choosing to spend it that way. It just happens day after day until suddenly there isn't much left. After Eleanor died, I started noticing how often I talked to myself, not out loud, just internally. I would think of something I wanted to tell her, a small observation, something she would have appreciated, and then remember she wasn't there. That happened dozens of times a day at first, less now, but it still happens. Michael came over one afternoon not long after the funeral. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one Eleanor used to sit at in the evenings. He looked older than I expected, not physically, emotionally. He talked about his kids, his job, the usual things. Then he paused and said he felt like he should say something important, but he didn't know how. I waited. He didn't finish the thought. Neither did I. The moment passed. I learned then that silence doesn't disappear with age. If anything, it becomes more entrenched. The longer you practice it, the harder it is to step out of it. David calls me every Sunday evening. He asks if I'm eating properly, if I've been outside, if I need anything. I answer honestly, but briefly. He doesn't ask how I'm feeling. I don't volunteer it. We both know the shape of our conversations by now. Changing them would feel like changing languages at this point. Another lesson I learned is that grief doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like clarity. You suddenly see your life without the noise that once filled it. You see the patterns, the habits, the choices you kept repeating without realizing they were choices at all. I don't wake up every day feeling crushed by regret. That would be unbearable. Most days are quiet, manageable. I make coffee, I read, I take short walks, but underneath all of that is a constant awareness, like a low hum of what I understand now and can't undo. I learned that aging doesn't automatically make you wise. It just removes your distractions. What's left is whatever you avoided looking at before. For me, that was emotional presence. The simple act of being fully there with another person, without trying to control or manage or minimize what was happening. If there's something tying all of this together, it's that life doesn't wait for you to feel prepared. The moments that shape you don't feel important while they're happening. They feel ordinary, interruptible, replaceable. It's only later, when they're gone, that you see what they were worth. I didn't see that when it mattered. I see it now, when most of my opportunities to act on it have already passed. I'm 78 years old. I sit in this house with memories that feel sharper than they used to. I think about Eleanor often, the way she folded laundry, the way she listened, the way she kept hoping I'd meet her where she was. I think about Michael and David, about the men they became and the man I was while they were becoming them. I don't feel resolved. I don't feel complete. I feel aware. And some days awareness is heavier than ignorance ever was. That's where I am now, still here, still remembering, still learning things I wish I had understood, when they could have changed something. And most days, I sit with that quietly because there's nothing else left to do.